Escobar, one of the most successful, ruthless, and efficient drug kingpins to ever walk this earth. Born in 1949 in the city of Rio Negro, Colombia, he grew from a middle-class lifestyle into a man wealthy enough to be ranked 7th richest man in the world in 1989. At the peak of his power, Escobar was moving tons of illegal drugs around the world. He was ordering political assassinations, gang murders, and even had ties with the Colombian government. Let's just say Mr. Escobar was very good at his job. But we aren't here to talk about how he made his estimated $30 billion of illicit wealth. We'll be looking at the insane mansions he spent his blood-soaked money buying. Because if there's one thing Escobar was good at, it was spending. It was estimated that Pablo Escobar was moving 15 tons of cocaine into the United States every single day, and was making about $810 a second. Suffice to say, he had a lot of money on hand, and he wasn't exactly about to put all of those illicit funds in a bank. Escobar would often hide his money in all sorts of locations, including warehouses, fields, and some of the massive estates he owned. One of these homes was the incredibly lavish estate known as La Manuela, which, if you asked him, he'd say was procured completely legitimately.
Pero usted puede asegurar que su dinero nunca ha tenido vinculación con el narcotráfico.
Siempre he asegurado que mi dinero no tiene vínculos con el narcotráfico.
So what kind of home was La Manuela? Well, it was Escobar's very own little escape. When he wanted a serene location near the water to rest and recuperate from the daily grind of running a drug empire, he'd go there. But unlike every other person who simply takes a vacation, Escobar decided to own his vacation spot. So, this 20-acre luxurious estate in the resort town of Guatape was his. It was right on the shores of the Peñol Reservoir, and he named the place after his daughter, Manuela Escobar. Pablo Escobar really poured a lot of money into this place as well. He wasn't going to name any shoddy old place after his pride and joy, after all. The place was decked out with a massive pool, tennis courts, and horse stables. Escobar loved to buy all sorts of vehicles, land, sea, and sky alike. It was noted that he bought himself 15 private jets and 6 helicopters. So, of course, La Manuela was going to have a helipad big enough to play football on, and a seaplane dock. When you're a drug lord as powerful as Escobar was, pretty much nowhere is safe. Even La Manuela wasn't much of an escape. He built guard towers on the property, so no one was getting in there without his permission. And yet, just 8 months before his death, it fell to an enemy attack. 200 kilograms of TNT was stuffed into one of its bathrooms and detonated, blowing up a sizable chunk of the building. After that, La Manuela was abandoned and slowly reclaimed by nature. It's currently dilapidated and covered in plants. On the bright side, people do often play paintball in its ruins, so it's not a complete waste. La Manuela was likely one of the many homes Escobar would hide some of his massive wealth. After his death, people would visit the estate and tear the place apart looking for abandoned loot. According to Escobar's brother, about 10%, or $2.1 billion, was written off from their earnings annually. Thanks to the strange locations they would hide their money, they just assumed it had been eaten by rats or destroyed by the elements. In some cases, it was simply lost. Another one of Escobar's homes was the estate known as Hacienda Nápoles, Spanish for Naples Estate. This was a home that really expressed Escobar's more fun-loving and playful side, as his wife recalls.
Conocer a Disney siempre es un sueño de cualquier ser humano. El papá se volvía un niño en ese parque con Sebas. Se subía a todas las montañas rusas así se muriera del pánico porque no le gustaban las montañas rusas, pero igual todo lo que fuera posible para ver a Sebas feliz.
Hacienda Nápoles was built in Puerto Triunfo, Colombia. The estate covered an insane 7.7 square miles of land. That's even bigger than Disneyland Paris. All that just for him and his family to live in. It was filled with a few attractions as well, to give it that theme park feel. The estate included a Spanish colonial house, a sculpture park, and a zoo that housed all sorts of exotic animals. There was a bull ring and a kart racing track, simultaneously keeping his family safe and entertained inside this heavily guarded estate. Remember when I mentioned Escobar's love for vehicles? Hacienda Nápoles was big enough to have a private airport. After all, he needed somewhere to store his private jets. And the home somehow still had enough space to store his massive collection of vintage and luxury cars. Following Pablo Escobar's death in 1993, many of the original buildings on the property were demolished or reconditioned for other purposes, and it's now been converted into a family-friendly theme park, built on top of the legacy of a very family-unfriendly man. Not all of Escobar's homes were in Colombia. For good reason too. Not everyone in Colombia was exactly a fan. One of these homes away from home was La Casa Grande, which he built on the tiny Caribbean island of La Isla Grande. On an island with a population of just over 1,000 lies one of Pablo Escobar's largest estates, and it was only accessible by a special boat from Cartagena. This was not a home for the prying eyes of the public. At the peak of its grandeur, La Casa Grande was so big that it had over 300 exquisitely furnished rooms, with solid gold showerheads in every single bathroom. This home stands as a testament to just how much money Escobar really had, and how despite his best efforts to spend it all, he never could quite exhaust it. When building this secret party home, Escobar commissioned a giant complex that would feature a mansion with resplendent white walls, an enormous swimming pool, a helicopter landing pad, and a dock. Making your way to this mansion would have required hours of trekking through the Caribbean forest, only to catch a glimpse of La Casa Grande before being turned around by an armed guard. After Escobar's death, the mansion in La Isla Grande came under government ownership and steadily fell into ruin. The sprawling complex that once held elaborate meetings between some of the most powerful men of the underground had become reclaimed by nature. La Casa Grande didn't get the treatment some of Escobar's other properties got. It's been left abandoned and forgotten, a dilapidated shell of what it once was. You can't even find it on Google Maps. During his lifetime, Pablo Escobar was able to build and acquire several properties, both at home and abroad, some of which were for himself, and some were for the impoverished communities of Colombia. Suffice to say, not every one of his homes was a massive mega mansion. An example of this was his comparatively less outrageous property in Medellin, a city in Colombia, and the home was called the Monaco Building. But yet, it was occupied by Escobar for several years. It was a grey, 6-story tall building with beautiful decor, and on top of it was Escobar's special place, an incredibly decked-out penthouse. Escobar occupied the Monaco Building for several years. That is, until 1988, when it was bombed by a rival cartel, forcing the kingpin to abandon it, and it remained abandoned for several decades, even after Escobar's demise. After Escobar's death, it became a tourist site. People would come to see where the famed drug lord once lived. In 2018, it was demolished by city officials in an attempt to move past the painful history the building represented, and has since been turned into a memorial for the victims of Pablo Escobar. Being the most powerful drug lord in all Colombia meant Escobar lived a life that had him avoiding rival drug cartels and avoiding police at the same time. With the trajectory his life was taking, he would either end up dead at the hands of a rival gang or rotting in prison for the rest of his days. But being the powerful man Pablo Escobar was, he somehow found a way to avoid imprisonment by the United States while being protected from the people that wanted his head.
Pablo's mentality had always been from the beginning that he would rather die in a hail of bullets than be extradited to the United States.
Using his immense wealth and influence, he managed to convince or coerce local authorities to allow him to build his own prison. Meaning, he would technically be imprisoned, but on his own terms. And remember, this is Pablo Escobar we're talking about. So of course this wasn't your typical government-sanctioned, self-built prison. This is how La Catedral, also referred to as Hotel Escobar, was born. This prison wasn't exactly built to keep Pablo in, instead functioning more to keep his enemies out. It had optimal defense capabilities, it was constructed on a foggy mountainside to prevent any attacks by air, and it was guarded by men Pablo specifically picked. Let's just say if you could manage to find the place at all, you definitely weren't getting in there alive. La Catedral got the nickname Hotel Escobar because the place was nothing more than a 5-star hotel, built so Escobar could play prison. The place was replete with every modern convenience he could imagine. It had a casino where he could gamble with the men he hired to guard him. He built a playhouse for his daughter Manuela. There was a spa, and there was a football field since Escobar was such a lover of the sport. He even once had the Colombian national team brought all the way up to his mountain prison, where he showed them great hospitality and they played some football together. Escobar didn't let pretending to be in prison keep him away from the outside world. He would often host many guests and throw parties in La Catedral. The place had been built with several luxuriously furnished rooms after all, and he wasn't going to let it go to waste.
Ballroom in there. They had casino games too. Wow. They say Frank Sinatra